If you didn't know, Katawa Shoujo was released back in 2009 and is one of the most well-received and influential English visual novels ever made. Whilst not as flashy and mainstream as some titles that came much later, it is quite literally the English visual novel to aspire to be. You can take my word on it. I have 2 separate reviews of it. Many English visual novels have taken inspiration from it, but none of them have succeeded in recreating that special feeling that's packaged in with its unique setting, well-written dialogue, phenomenal soundtrack, etc. But if there is one visual novel that tries to get close, it's Missing Stars, a free visual novel that was released in November of 2023. Missing Stars began as a Katawa Shoujo inspired visual novel, but as development went on, it became something more to the development team, who wanted to increase public understanding of mental disorders. Whilst in some ways it mirrors Katawa Shoujo, in other ways it stands on its own 2 feet as something that's unique. And even though only the first act is out, there are still 5 routes with 16 hours of content to experience, and it's certainly worth talking about. The question is, will Missing Stars live up to the legacy of one of its main inspirations? That's what we're here to find out. My name is BruceGoneLoose, but you can just call me Bruce as we talk about Missing Stars. The story begins with Eric Wilhelm, our Swiss main protagonist, as he is out hiking with him, who will eventually learn to be his brother. Unfortunately, Eric's normal life slips away from under his feet when a tragic accident occurs, wounding him both physically and mentally. Switching schools being deemed the best course of action for him, he is enrolled into Privatgymnasium St. Dipna, a special boarding school in Vienna, Austria, for teenagers struggling with their mental health. Eric's family is trying to be as supportive of him as they possibly could be, but the man in question is not happy because he sees the school as a place for different kids. The story is primarily about Eric getting used to his new life at St. Dipna Academy, meeting and interacting with the large cast of characters, and learning how to coexist with them in this unfamiliar environment. Eric is laid back and easygoing, but since his accident and arriving at St. Dipna's, he is much more reserved. He often flounders when interacting with his fellow students, since he has difficulties controlling his curiosity as to why each student is here, whether it is or isn't obvious, without thinking whether he should or shouldn't pry. But over the course of the common route, he slowly learns to fit in and is in much higher spirits by the time his older sisters come to visit him at the end of each route. If there's one thing to say about Missing Stars, it's that it has a lot of characters. Like you got French girl and Russian girl and quiet girl and Slipknot, the whole shebang. However, the first act of Missing Stars focuses exclusively on the 5 characters which Eric spends the most time with during his time at St. Dipna's Academy. The first of the main cast you meet is Annalise, the aforementioned quiet girl who is found at the back corner of the classroom listening to music. She doesn't talk at all, opting to use written communication instead for the few times she does interact with Eric until she is more comfortable with him. Anna is quite distant towards other students, so most are surprised when they find out that Eric has been able to communicate with her. Next is Katya, who Eric meets in the cafeteria. She gives an elegant and refined aura, with her thought-provoking dialogue confusing Eric initially. As the lead soprano of the school choir, she is quite popular amongst the other students and not the easiest to impress, especially since she is an expert at picking up social cues, unlike Eric. Natalia is a newer student, much like Eric, coming from Russia with her sister Sophia. Natalia is outgoing and excited to learn about the world around her, although goofy would be another word, as the jokes she tells makes both Eric and myself cringe. She is the complete opposite of Katya in that she cannot read social cues at all, not even trying to be roundabout with others' disabilities like Eric, but instead asks dead on, despite how rude it may come off. Isolde is another quiet eccentric that Eric meets out in the wild, which I mean literally, as he finds her sketching birds whilst out on one of his walks. Though not as quiet as Annalise, she is still quite reserved, and Eric has difficulties breaking through that barrier at first. Her passions are astronomy and, predictably, birds. The last of the main cast is Jean, a kind and friendly student tutor who runs the astronomy club along with Isolde. She is a very driven student as compared to most, typically found in the library, either studying or giving lessons. Jean and Isolde are both French and became quick friends because of that, so they are typically found hanging out together. But whilst these 5 are the main characters for this act, there are many side characters that appear quite often throughout the story, thus making for quite the diverse and boisterous cast. The story boasts 230,000 words for its first act, which is nothing to scoff at. I really enjoyed the world this visual novel built between its writing, art, and music. It really builds the feeling of Saint Dimphna's unique and self-inclusiveness, and in that way, it reminds me of how I felt reading Katawa Shoujo. I'd like to make a point, however, and note that the writing style is very different. It's like if you took the plot of Katawa Shoujo and the writing of Life is Strange and just put it together in a modern visual novel. There are a lot of choices to make as you go along the story, and these end up culminating into a final choice that lets you choose whose routes to pursue. The routes aren't really romantic in nature, but do end with what is essentially a date. Rather, the routes are more about spending time with the character they focus on and learning more about their thoughts, feelings, and mental disability. That being said, I will say this. I think the conclusion to each route is unsatisfactory. I suppose it would be, as this is only the first part of 4 as confirmed by the developer, but I also wonder what their approach will be for the future acts of the visual novel. You'd probably think of how Katawa Shoujo does it, with each next act focusing on the next chapter of a character's route completely, but I'm not sure that's the approach they are going for here. This visual novel has been in development for 10 years at this point, and from my understanding, earlier versions of Missing Stars had routes for some of the other characters you've seen thus far as well. So my main fear is that they spread themselves too thin, having an ocean amount of routes with a puddle amount of depth. I'm not the developer, so I can't give any insight, but I hope the characters who got routes here are not forgotten about later on. Eric himself doesn't have much development on his own personal problems. By the end of each route, he is satisfied and used to attending St. Dimphna's Academy, getting over his feeling of not belonging there, but he has no personal progression towards why he is there in the first place. In that sense, it makes me think that the focus of Missing Stars will be Eric and his journey to get over his personal illness rather than any individual character route, which is in essence the opposite of Katawa Shoujo, but these are just theoreticals and me thinking out loud. I appreciated 2 of the 5 routes and thought the rest were mediocre. Annalise was my favorite character and route. It might just be because it's chill or I love her theme song, but it was my first route of Missing Stars and ended up being the highlight for me. My second route I appreciated was Katya's because I thought it was well written. I think depending on the experiences you have in life will determine how you feel about this route. It's very easy to see Katya as a gaslighting and manipulative bitch, and she is, but not to an unrealistic degree, because I dated someone that reminds me a lot of how Katya is characterized here, and in that sense, I think the route was well written, mainly because it pissed me off because it brought back pseudo PTSD, but nonetheless, I ended up relating to this route. That being said, I could see many without that sort of experience just thinking this route sucks. The other 3 routes were not really interesting. You learn more about the characters in question, but they feel samey and like they fall into the same structure. Overall, Missing Stars nails the Katawa Shoujo feeling, but its routes leave much to be desired. Would I say it's still a story worth reading? Yes, but temper your expectations a little bit. I mean, it's only the first part. There's a fair amount of CGs, and I thought they looked pretty good. The backgrounds were plentiful, and the sprites were okay. This isn't really a slight to the visual novel, but I've realized that these days I pretty much only read high-budget Japanese visual novels or extremely scuffed English ones. So when something like Missing Stars is good, I don't really have much to say about it, but that doesn't mean it's bad. The soundtrack is the highlight of Missing Stars and why I stayed. It is large and varied, being atmospheric at times and catchy at others. I'm of the opinion that the soundtrack is one of the most crucial weapons in a visual novel's arsenal, especially for indie visual novel developers. And here for Missing Stars, they crushed it. And for that reason alone, I really hope that Missing Stars becomes a complete project one day. I picked up Missing Stars on a whim and got what I think to be the closest a visual novel will ever get to Katawa Shoujo in terms of feeling. It doesn't hit those highs, it's currently unfinished, it doesn't have Emi, Lily, or Shizune, but I see the potential. I will be following this project's development, and I'm looking forward to what it will live up to. I recommend it, just keep an open mind. I almost dropped it after the first hour, and I felt I would have regretted it if I did. For the price of free, you'd be crazy to not at least give it a go. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed watching. Let me know what visual novels you want to see in the future, and I'm gonna go drink some Coke and subscribe to my favorite YouTubers.